Well, good afternoon. I'm Sarah Wyant, the founder and president of Agri-Pulse Communications, and I'm delighted to have so many of you join us for our webinar this afternoon, focused on analyzing the health and economics of seed oils. Thanks to the United Soybean Board and the American Soybean Association for sponsoring today's webinar. Today, we're going to hear from our distinguished speakers with facilitated questions and answers. I'm going to make brief speaker introductions, encourage you to dig into their full biographies on our website. We also want to hear from you during the webinar. Feel free to offer your questions in the Q&A portion of the bottom of our screen. Please do not use the chat box. If you're experiencing any technical issues, please also use the Q&A portion and one of our specialists will help you. In addition, we're going to be recording this webinar and it will be available on agri-pulse.com later this week for you to review once again or to share with any of your friends. During today's webinar, we're going to discuss something that's become really quite a hot topic, primarily because of comments that have been made by Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and those who are part of the Make America Healthy Again movement. Some of you may have heard he's made comments suggesting that consumers should move away from seed oils and move toward things like beef tallow in their diets. And for people like me who grew up in farm country and many others, when we read about this stuff, it's a head scratcher because we've read decades of research explaining that oil made from soybeans, corn, canola, sunflower, safflower, cottonseed, rice bran, and grapeseed are safe and actually good for you. So even the American Heart Association has written about the benefits of seed oils and noted there are many reasons to consume them. So we're going to start today with someone who can provide insights on how soybeans, which can be turned into one of the types of seed oils that we're discussing, are sustainably grown on her Michigan farm. Carla Schultz also leads the Communication and Education Committee on the United Soybean Board. Carla, please tell us about your farm and family, as well as your efforts to educate about the Soy Checkoff and seed oils.
Sarah, thanks so much for that introduction. I was happy to join today. I'm happy to tell you a little about my farm and what I do as a soybean farmer, as a mother, and as a United Soybean Board director. So go ahead and you can go to the next slide. So a little bit about me. Sarah did a little introduction, but I do sit in the state of Michigan. I farm with my husband, my parents, and then actually my husband and I have four children as well. We actually operate a farm called Eight Plates Farm. We get that question a lot. Why is it named Eight Plates? Well, if you think of the six of us and you think of my two parents, that makes eight plates at the table. Because we always know, and this is a really good conversation starter, especially with today's topic, that food brings conversation. And I think we've talked about the seed oil topic for sure. So we want everyone to know they're welcome. We love to communicate what we do on our farm, and hence why I love attending any kind of presentations, webinars, or podcasts as this one. On our farm, we do utilize some methods of farming, and you'll see, what do we do on our farm? We raise soybeans, corn, dry beans. Think of your navy beans, your black beans. We also raise soft white winter wheat, hay, cattle, and hogs. So you can see we're quite diversified. And part of that has to do where we sit in Michigan. We're about 2 hours north of Detroit. So we do have a consumer base that we connect with as well. You noticed at the beginning, we do run Eight Plates Farm. That's really our consumer direct market. So we only sell our beef, pork, and then chickens seasonally to customers. It's not wholesale. We have a website that we sell through. On the other hand, we know how the global and domestic markets work because of the commodities that we grow in our farm as well. One of the big things is you noticed and probably heard we have four children, right? So thinking of the future, thinking of sustainability, thinking of sustaining our own family, we have to think, what are we growing? How are we growing it? Is this going to be sustainable for future generations? And really, when you look at that big picture, you will notice that US soybean farmers have cut emissions by 43% per bushel, while increasing our yields or production by 130%, which is a huge leap for any type of farmer, right? When we look at the commodity prices right now, somehow we need to fill that gap. And that not only comes from yield, it also comes from demand. Go to the next slide, please. So some of that is making those small adjustments on our farm. Being from the state of Michigan, we are surrounded by water. So some of these adjustments and methods have already been proven in our state because we are surrounded by the Great Lakes. We don't have as much organic matter. You can imagine being surrounded by water. We have quite a bit of sand, sandier soils. So one thing that we have incorporated over the years is we do no-till farming, which means we do not till the ground right before we're planting it. So we try to keep the organic matter in the soil to break down. Something we also utilize is cover cropping, where that's planting another crop in the off season, right? So after harvest, we plant another crop essentially, and that's adding nutrients and organic matter into the soil. My husband always tells me, Mother Nature does not like to be naked. So if we don't plant what we want, she will clothe herself. And I think that is always true when you look around. Something that helps us too, as we think of technology, is that precision agriculture that we can utilize on our farm. So that might be GPS, it might be your precision spray technology that we use because we know the inputs cost a lot. Oh, I just saw a graph today and it was crazy what farmers are bringing home and the expenses that we have on the input side. So we want to make sure we're not using too much because at the end of the day, that cuts into our bottom line and how much we can make as a farmer and how much we can sustain over the future. Next slide, please. The big thing is though, right? Building trust from farm to table, one conversation at a time. I really like that headline. I think I told you a piece of our business really connects to consumers. And we all know that we've read big headlines across social media, right? On the news. And as Sarah mentioned it right off the bat about seed oils in general. And one thing we always have to remember is we have to go back to the science research claims. I think so many times, right? It's sensationalized enough that we just jump on the bandwagon. We see something and we just take it at face value without actually digging into the research. And we know the research is there, and it was mentioned to begin with that the American Heart Association gives us the claims that it is good for our heart, right? We have heart healthy claims. We have the omega-3s, the omega-6s that are good for our heart. We also know that soybean oil has unsaturated fatty acids, which are also good for human health. In part of this, when we look at the global population and the growth, we also know this has to be economically feasible for a growing population. And when we look at soybean oil, that's what we find. We find that it's heart healthy. We find it is good for us to use in everyday cooking. And we also notice that it's actually affordable. I think sometimes we forget about that piece. And I'm talking about as a whole, right? We forget about something that has been newly innovated and it sounds really great. And I will tell you what, as an American, I love the choice. But at the end of the day, there are some, and there are large demographic, they can't afford a new innovative product that just came on the shelf and it took a big expense to make, right? And when we look at soybean oil, we know that it's very affordable and it's very healthy and safe to use. Next slide, please. And so the very exciting piece of this is when you look at soybeans, I always call them the miracle crop because there's so much beyond soybeans than just the oil or for human food consumption or even livestock feed. We look at soybean in use in everyday items. And the picture right now that you see in front of you is firefighting soy foam. What a great innovative product that we can bring to the marketplace. Right now, we know that the soy foam that is being used with firefighters, it is petrochemically based. It does contain PFAS. And when you think of spraying foam, be it in nature, in cities, in a building, you're going to have that PFAS, I would say leaching either into nature or in the city or where people live. Something like soy foam actually biodegrades and it's from a renewable resource. So very exciting with that. Next slide, please. And here are some other uses for soybeans that I don't think we normally think of, right? Pure bond plywood. And you might say, well, how in the world are soybeans used in any type of plywood? Think of the adhesives that are used. Think of a lot of bio-based products. We mentioned the soy foam, your soy in Hollywood, and you might think, well, that doesn't make any sense either. But you have soy wax, soy ink. You have the plywood that might be used in Hollywood sets. You have bio-based products like shoes that you wear. Skechers actually is one of the brands that uses soy in their tennis shoes. Goodyear tires. They use soy in their tires. Even lotions, face washes, detergents. Soy is found in so many spaces, and we want to continue to grow that demand. And when I think of demand, next slide, please, I think of this piece: beans, trains, and biofuels. This is the piece I think that we've missed out on for quite a long time, and I really hope it can grow because as a soybean farmer, we can use our soybeans in fuels that will fuel the world. Right now, a biodiesel is used in all of our 6 Class 1 railroads across the country, which is a huge step in the right direction. When we think of biofuels in the space of maritime vessels, the question is how much can we use that? I was on a call earlier today and they mentioned policy and really what's holding us up. And as a soybean farmer, it gets a little sad, right? Because we know the validity and the value of soybeans being used in biofuels. And sometimes that would create the demand, but we just can't get there, right? Because we have administration and we have to go to DC to do some of those things that holds us back a bit. At the same time, we are investing in this space so that we can, when we get there, right, we'll have the growth. And that's exciting on our end from the United Soybean Board. And that's what we do. We put money into the investments that will turn out big for soybean farmers because our everyday life depends on that. Next slide, please. So I just want to say thanks for having me today. We have some amazing other speakers, and I will let Sarah take it from there.
Thanks so much, Carla. I appreciate your insights and look forward to having you with us for the Q&A portion when we get done with the next couple of presentations. So thank you so much for all of your information. Next up is Julie Ullman, who's the CEO of the Soy Nutrition Institute Global. SNI Global is a nonprofit corporation that funds research and shares evidence-based information on the impact of soybeans and soy ingredients for human health and nutrition. So I'm going to hand it on over to you, Julie. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it. And Carla did a great job talking about this, the science behind soy, so I appreciate that. So today, what are we going to talk about? What does the soy really say? I'm sorry, the science really say about seed oils? My goal really today is to be practical, define some terms, address some of the biggest claims that are really in the social media venue these days, and leave you with some clear takeaways. So let's jump ahead. There we go. So what are seed oils? In plain English, they are liquid cooking oils squeezed out of plant seeds, as distinguished from not the flesh or the fruit. So these here are shown, are the 8 specific ones currently called out as within the anti-seed oil movement. They're corn, soybean, rice bran, grapeseed, canola, which is also termed rapeseed, cottonseed, sunflower, and safflower. So to talk about health, we need to do just a quick primer on fat. All right. So dietary fats are broken out into 4 main categories based upon their structure. In the middle there, I've highlighted where the area that seed oils fall. Seed oils are predominantly composed of unsaturated fat and contain around 2 grams of saturated fat or less per serving. Most seed oils have higher amounts of polyunsaturated fat versus other fat sources. And the crux of the discussion that comes into play here is what both Carla and Sarah mentioned, which is the sudden shift from dietary guidance on polyunsaturated fats to a trend trying to support saturated fat. So that's what we're going to kind of debunk here. There we go. I apologize. I'm in the Midwest and I've lost my internet service, so please forgive me. It's a little delayed. So what we have here is an interesting situation because many of these seed oils actually have a qualified heart claim from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, stating that they may reduce the risk of coronary heart disease. Studies show that soybean oil may reduce the risk of coronary heart disease based on its cholesterol lowering effects when replacing saturated fat in the diet. Claims have also been awarded to canola oil, corn oil, and olive oil. Nevertheless, we continue to hear the rhetoric over the social media saying that they are not healthy for us, when in fact, globally, guidance has been very consistent over the past 60 years, with most leading global bodies recommending replacing saturated fat with unsaturated fat. Apologize. There we go. So, if the guidance has been consistent for decades, why the confusion? So, as I mentioned earlier, a big driver is the rise of the health influencers across social media. I would term them high confidence, low nuanced, especially in the form of short form media. I think the next slide captures this sentiment perfectly. So, let me read this to you. Let me interrupt your expertise with my confidence, he says. Isn't that what we're actually seeing these days? But what I recommend we talk about today is how we can anchor our findings in the totality of the evidence. There we go. So, what is public awareness? What is it around this topic? It's mixed. Some people think that they are healthy, some people have heard negative messaging, and many really don't recognize the term. As you can see here, only 46% of the people believe seed oils are healthy. 4 in 10 heard positive or mostly positive information, and 25% have never even heard of this term seed oils. So, as you can tell, it's very confusing to the consumer. So let's look at the top 3 anti-seed oil arguments. So we're going to jump into these one by one, and I'm going to quickly run through here. So we'll focus predominantly on these 3. So the first one is that the anti-seed oil claims say that seed oils are a modern addition to the diet, and increased consumption is correlated with the rise in several chronic diseases like diabetes and obesity. Well, we know that they aren't new to the human diet. Flax and seed oils have been used for millennium, and I'll concede that they are, though, a modern refinery did contribute to scaling them up in a massive way since the 60s. So we can understand that there is a correlation between the rise of seed oil consumption, but we don't think it's causal in how diabetes and obesity has formed. But we would concede again that both of these chronic diseases have markedly increased over the past 60 years. Although it's worth noting that heart disease mortality has decreased. And yes, consumption of the seed oils have increased. However, many things in society have changed over that time also, contributing to this obesity epidemic. So here's a slide to point out why we can't just say because 2 things have occurred together that one causes the other. Sorry, I'm struggling with my internet. There we go. So while this is a little bit humorous, it's tongue in cheek, this is a good example that correlation is not causation. This is the core logical error that many in the anti-seed oil movement play, which is that trends overlay and therefore caused it. Ice cream and shark attacks do move together, probably because of the season, not causation. We have to point people back to rigorous study designs and the overall evidence in these matters. Secondly, the argument was made that there was a correlation between intake of seed oils with obesity and other matters of disease. We can show that in contrast to that, observational studies and human intervention studies show the intake of the main fatty acid in seed oils actually improves glucose control and increases insulin sensitivity. It may also reduce waist circumference. And stay tuned. While it's not yet published, we do have a study clinically funded through, clinical study funded through the United Soybean Board that investigators indicate early results show that people with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which affects about 3 in 10 people in the world, soybean oil, rich in polyunsaturated fat, actually decreased liver fat in that study. That will soon be on the press, we hope, in the next month. So we can debunk argument number 1, and let's look quickly at argument number 2. Claim 2 is that omega-6, which is the linoleic acid, is pro-inflammatory. This often lends itself because old narratives that were started in 2008. Two problems with this is that it is outdated, and the last 17 years of trials on human subjects and narrative reviews show that this is not true and that the evidence that they're basing their argument on is dated. Supporting that, we can look at high quality scientific evidence that tells a different story. More than 80 randomized controlled trials and multiple meta-analyses have consistently found that higher linoleic acid intake does not actually increase inflammation. Large observational studies have found no association between higher dietary linoleic acid and the markers of chronic inflammation. And finally, some studies even show an inverse relationship where people who consume more linoleic acid actually have lower levels of inflammatory markers. So you can see here that a plethora of systematic reviews and meta-analysis, which are the highest form of science, are showing that linoleic acid does not affect markers of inflammation or inflammatory states. So let's debunk that second argument. And let's look at the third, that the processing involved in producing seed oils creates harmful compounds. This can also be refuted due to updated and stronger scientific information that currently exists. The process itself does not make it harmful. In fact, let's look at this in more detail. So hexane, which is the predominant solvent used to extract oils, is evaporated upon heating. And safety analysis shows that exposures are well below safety limits. And to even hit the most conservative limit, you would have to drink 4,900 grams per day. That's the equivalent of over a gallon of salad dressing daily. So the bottom line is, whatever the processing story, the more important question is, what does consuming oil do to your health, and how does that affect the overall health indicated by scientific evidence? Let's reject that argument. We know that obesity is multifactorial, and inflammation signals isn't supported by randomized controlled trials. Oxidative stress isn't supported by human evidence, and processing is designed for safety and quality. So yes, seed oils have documented health benefits. So how can your voice be heard? This misinformation, as was mentioned earlier, is spreading faster than the science. Your voice matters, and especially in local and trade media. So we would love for you to be able to stay informed. On the screen here, you can see some information where you can get materials, not only talking points, you can help share some facts, you can be available for interviews and stay informed. But we've made it easy through many of these links to use the Seed Oil Information Hub, connect with SNI Global online to help support your voice in this important topic. Thank you, Sarah, and I apologize for such technical delays on my end.
You know, Julie, that was great. And we certainly understand there's been some incredibly high winds and storms and outages, and we're just glad you're with us and we're able to share that information. So thank you very much. Julie will also be back with us for Q&A. So as a reminder, please enter your questions for when we open that up after our next presenter, who I'm pleased to announce is Carson Fort. He's the Government Affairs Manager for the American Soybean Association. So Carson, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, and thank you for inviting us here and for everyone listening in. This is a really important topic for American agriculture. And I'm going to run down just kind of a brief synopsis of an economic study that was done in the early part of the year, which was conducted by the World Agricultural, Economic, and Environmental Services, WAES for short, bit of a mouthful. And it looked at what would be the economic impacts of removing seed oils from the food supply. So basically, if you just snapped your fingers, turned the tap off, all of a sudden seed oils are no longer part of what we consume. And there are a lot of ramifications. So a few kind of assumptions as we dig into this, just for your all's understanding. The baseline that we're looking at here is 2025 and most of the results occur over 10 years. So looking at a timeline of 2025 to 2035. And there are some differences that occur in there that I'll talk about a little bit. It mostly relates to how crop area is impacted within that timeline, as well as prices that are expected throughout there. Also, this is a model which can help give context, but of course is not necessarily true to life. Setting aside the possibility of a seed oil ban, it's also unlikely that the processing industry could just all of a sudden adjust to this. That would also take significant time. So again, these are good context tools, contextual tools, and not necessarily true to form, but important as we dig into this. So if we go to the first slide here, this study looked at two scenarios. In the first scenario, it attempts to hold U.S. vegetable oil consumption flat, which it does by increasing olive oil, peanut oil, and palm oil. And I should clarify that the seed oils that we are talking about here included soybean oil, canola, sunflower, cottonseed, and corn. So not necessarily everything from the Hateful Eight, but kind of the five major seed oils that we see in the food supply. And this led to some interesting findings here. You see an increase in imported oils. So, of course, there's a big shift to olive and palm oils, which, of course, are not produced here in the United States. We produce a very tiny amount of olive oil and basically import a bunch of it. So, that and palm oil, of course, which we do not grow here. So important to keep in mind that soybean oil is a domestic product, which helps keep those costs down, as Carla kind of mentioned earlier. And so there was a dramatic increase in expenditures for oils and fats to the tune of about 43%. And the price for Malaysian palm oil, I just mentioned that we're going to be importing a lot more of that in this scenario. That goes up 14%. So folks abroad are actually benefiting off of, if we got rid of seed oils, folks abroad would actually benefit more than we would. And I already mentioned that we don't grow those products, palm and olive, but also they are not a direct substitute for seed oils. Again, this is assumptions that work to fit the model, but palm oil and olive oil do not work in things like salad dressing. There's a reason that you typically find soybean oil in those products, because when you stick it in the fridge, you're gonna solidify palm and olive oil. And I don't think anyone is really into using chunky salad dressing, but I don't know, maybe it could be a new trend. So there is in this scenario, there is a little bit of an uptick in soybean oil used for biofuels. We have gotten questions. Well, if you get rid of seed oils in the food supply, biodiesel is going to pick that up. Well, that's true in the short term, especially for soybeans, but ultimately the price of the commodity drops so much that it's not as beneficial. And actually, canola prices in this scenario dropped so much that soybeans are displaced from the biofuels market and is instead replaced with canola. So another kind of interesting caveat there. And if we go to the next slide, I'll talk about the second scenario, which assumes instead of a flat consumption rate, so instead of thinking that consumers will continue to purchase and consume the same amount of fats and oils that they would only spend 8% more on fats and oils. A lot of the outcomes are the same. So we still see a much higher dependence on palm and olive oil. We see a reduction of soybean prices and acreage. But what we do see here is that you're actually reducing the consumption of vegetable oils by 21 pounds, which is pretty significant. When overall consumption per capita per year of all food oil is around 70 pounds, give or take a little bit there. But you're in this scenario, you're getting rid of nearly a third of your oil consumption, which is pretty significant, not just kind of from the economic side, but also the health side. This was an economic study, so we don't necessarily know the health outcomes of reducing your fats and oils intake by that much. But we do know fats and oils do serve an important role in the human diet. So it would be interesting to take this a step further and see what that implication will ultimately mean for human health. And of course, you do see pretty significant differences in palm and olive oil prices and planted acres. Again, there are a lot of implications when you increase palm oil consumption that much. Palm has a pretty high carbon score, so removing a bunch of forested area to chop down more palm oil probably leads to pretty significant environmental outcomes as well. So if we turn to our final slide here, I'll talk a little bit about what we saw in either scenario. And of course, overall, crop cash receipts decrease on an average of $3 billion per year. Again, we're talking about removing domestically grown sources of oil. So if you're removing that, then farmers are losing out. Not just farmers, but also consumers, because consumers are ultimately going to be paying a higher price tag for fats and oils. I've talked a lot about olive oil, but olive and peanut oil consumption nearly double. So maybe peanuts win a little bit, but overall, it's not nearly enough to get back the supply that you need if you get rid of seed oils. And again, this is going through a thought process of if you ban seed oils, but you don't even necessarily have to have a strictly legal ban on seed oils to maybe start to work your way towards some of these outcomes. Just kind of removing the reputation or denigrating the reputation of what is a healthy product, safe product, domestic product, just trying to suggest people move away from that could lead to some of these outcomes ultimately anyway, without any kind of de facto ban. So that is pretty significant. And again, been talking about a lot of the other sources, but I think maybe surprising takeaway here is that meat consumption actually also decreases in these scenarios because the price of soybeans increases as you get rid of a huge market. And so the price of soybean meal kind of raises the cost of meat production. So obviously, poultry and pork prices are going to go up there, some beef as well, but overall, a pretty dramatic increase, or rather decrease, of how much meat that people are going to be consuming. So with all of those in mind, I'm happy to turn it back to you, Sarah, for some questions.
Thanks, Carson. And I'd like to bring both Carla and Julie back on screen here, and we can have a discussion with all of you over some of the things that have been brought up. And again, for our audience, please enter your questions in the Q&A portion of the webinar. And please, let's try to keep them to seed oils. I know that we had one that came in on agrivoltaics, and I think we'll leave that for another day. But thank you for at least submitting a question. And I'm going to go ahead and start with you, Julie, because another person sent in just not a question, but a request for your research that you were highlighting here. And I think as people try to get more information on what is actually the truth behind some of this research, I know you work with dozens of researchers and you've got the scientific background from your career. How do people figure out what information to trust, which researchers to trust when they're trying to learn more?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. And I think it's really important as social media rises to realize that influencers tend to optimize for attention. I'm not saying they all do, but a lot of times they make bold claims, they act certain about certain topics that they maybe really aren't. So I would say practically look for links to peer-reviewed publications or pre-printed sources, accurate representations of results. I mean, when it's all or nothing, that's a pretty good indication that it might be sensationalized. The other thing is when they disclose their conflicts of interest, whether their claims match the broader evidence is also really important, not just viral one-off takeaways. And that's one of the things that's been really disappointing about some of the anti-seed oil movement. Some of their major points have been science that has been I don't want to say debunked because science is a process, in which case, you test hypotheses and you see where you go. So some of this stuff was valid questions that were being asked in maybe 2008, but since then, the body of evidence has increased, not only, not just using animal or rat models, but using human clinical data. That type of information is much more validated, and it becomes more of a look at the totality of the evidence. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Carla, I want to build on something that you mentioned too, because you've talked about your working on boards, running a farm, you've got your direct to consumer business, and probably your most important job as a mother with 4 children. Uh, how do you have how do you explain to people that you really don't, you're not out to feed your family anything that's not healthy? I mean, it just isn't, it wouldn't be something that people would even think about, but yet there seems to be this disconnect. How do you get around that and really bridge those gaps?
That's a great question, Sarah, right? And it's a very valid question. And I think we all fear what we don't know, right? So a lot of times I put myself in the shoes of someone else because to me, it's normal. It's my everyday, right? Farming, raising children, running businesses, but not everyone has that or does that. So a lot of why we started our direct to consumer business was to connect directly to someone who couldn't see the validity of where a soybean goes, right? But we can put that together. And I get the question all the time, what do you feed your animals? And I can tell them, we feed them soybean meal, and this is why we feed that, and I can back it. Actually, on the human side, Julie mentioned research, and on the same side, it's like livestock feed and the research we have with that. And not only that, but we raise our children in this environment every day. And so I really always try to keep it very personal. In my my United Soybean board members know that I always like when I present, I always like to start with the personal story because at the end of the day, we all can connect to someone in some way. You just have to figure out how to get there. And if it's as me as a mother, if it's as me as a business owner or as a leader on a board, I try to find the best way to communicate with whoever may need to hear that message.
And if you can maybe build on that with an example, we had a question that came in from Jenny Schmidt asking, beyond commodity organizations, how can farmers best advocate for seed oils? Do you have any examples of perhaps in your rural area or when you've met with consumers on the road?
I mean, yes, some of the best ways, right? When we talk about social media, sometimes it gets a negative connotation, but there's a lot of positivity out there that we know is there. So one thing we have is we have our farm channel, right? We have an Instagram page, we have a Facebook page, we have a phone number. People can call us. We can be involved at the base level with our neighbors. I just had someone call, "Hey neighbor, can I come over and get some steaks?" Yes, you can. And we are inspected, and so we're all, we've done what we need to do to sell directly to the public in a way that is also legal. So we've gone through all those steps. But I would say base level is just it is social media that can be easily done. And even at like my local library, I've done where I've read a book to my, local children, and it brings children in, but it also brings parents in, and they're the ones asking the questions. So some of those small, tiny steps in your own community, you can build on, and then bridge out from there, joining organizations and even joining county boards, right? It's community, county, and then it branches out even to state or federal boards as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And Carson, I'm going to turn for you here too. There's a couple questions for you also that are coming in, but I was curious. You talked about this 58-pound per capita loss of seed oil and filling that up with palm consumption, and that's obviously one scenario that you found from the research, but we've got others who are saying, well, we should just replace everything with beef tallow. And we were joking a little earlier, it's been a long time, but when I grew up, we had this big can, like, um, and we just saved all of our used grease and the byproducts from the livestock that we raised. How do you really see, would it even be possible if we wanted to replace everything with beef tallow? I mean, how many cows would that require and how many other protein sources?
Yeah, and I think you kind of in that question you actually gave part of the answer. You mentioned it as a byproduct, and that is really underscores why you can't just replace seed oil consumption with animal fats. That's a huge component. We did see in these scenarios that tallow consumption does increase, but it's very, very small. It's about half a pound per capita. So a really small increase. And the reason for that is, yeah, as I mentioned, animal fats are a byproduct of animal production. No one's really raising cattle just for beef tallow. It's everything else that comes with it. So it's a very small portion of the value of an animal carcass. So it's unlikely that it'd be able to reach that demand. And actually, there's about 80% of the large supply is used for food, and then 30% of white grease, so that's your beef tallow there, is used for food. The rest is actually for feed and biofuels. And even if you shifted all of white grease to food, it would be about less than 3 pounds per capita. And again, your typical consumption is nearly 70 pounds. So that is a dramatic increase of how much beef tallow it would take to replace the seed oil supply.
Thank you for that. Another question came in just asking you to clarify your comment about olive oil and peanut oil consumption doubling in a situation where seed oil consumption decreases. You also see an increase in saturated fat intake as a result of that. Could you just add a little bit more to your explanation about the potential increase of olive and peanut oil consumption?
Yeah, so it is a little confusing talking about peanuts in this context because peanuts do produce oil but are not considered a seed oil. So yeah, that's a little bit confusing. But again, when I say a doubling, it's actually pretty small overall in terms of again consumption based on pounds. So it's about I think 3 pounds. For olive oil and around 2 for peanuts. So the reason that you're shifting towards those is again we're operating under you're removing seed oil, so you have to go to the next kind of oil replacement that works for similar uses, even though again it's not necessarily a one-to-one. So that is why in the United States you're probably increasing your peanut production because that can take over some of the soy, but that's only so much. And of course the next oil that is predominant in the market is olive oil and palm oil, which is why you see an increase of those because and there's an interesting story in there as well about how much production can you actually increase for olive oil, because it takes a long time for olive oil trees to come online and actually into production. So again, this is a model and is not necessarily perfect, but helps to provide that context of what could happen.
Okay, thank you. Julie, a question for you. When you and I both mentioned this a little bit, I mean, there's organizations out there like American Heart Association and others, but Sherry, excuse me, Sherry Whitworth is one of our participants and wants to know how you obtain trusted third-party sources outside of the soy family to provide other context and help in debunking some of these arguments.
Yeah, so interesting enough, there's a variety. So the WHO, the World Health Organization, obviously the American Heart Association, and while the MAHA movement has somewhat tried to debunk them, dispel their validity, consumer consumers continue to tell us they trust that. So the other ones are universities. That's highly trusted. Some of these results, we just got these about 6 months ago. We did some paneling, and consumers still really trust those organizations. So there's a lot. I'd say university studies, the independently funded, like American Heart Association, Institute for Food and Information Council. There's a variety. I'd be happy. I've got probably 20 I could recommend if somebody would like to reach out to me. I'd be glad to give it to them.
Great, thank you for that. And another question came in from you from Brian Adam. Other than hexane, are there other chemicals used in processing seed oils, and what do we know about those products?
Well, I'm not quite sure there is many other options. I think, and Carson, you might jump in. I'm not a processing expert, but I would say 98% of the market probably uses hexane. It's the most widely used extraction solvent because it evaporates very quickly and effectively. So it is what I think most use. To be honest, a lot of the processors keep some of that proprietary. I think your only other play would be the expeller processed, and they're such small scale. I mean, they do a great job, but they're a very small scale. You can't do a lot of commercial processing on the extractors like that. Carson, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think that was spot on, Julie.
Okay. There's also been a growth in the farm country of high oleic soybean oil. I'm not sure which one of you would want to jump in on this, but what about the prospects of using more high oleic versus conventional soybean oil?
Carson, do you want me to take it from a health perspective?
Yeah, I think that'd be good.
Yeah, so they're really compatible because it's not one or the other. Because as I spoke of earlier with conventional soybean oil, the health benefits that we see can be attributed to the polyunsaturated fats because conventional soybean oil has higher polyunsaturated fat, whereas high oleic has a higher monounsaturated fat. So you get different health effects. They both do have USDA heart health claims associated with them, but they function differently. So from my perspective as a research organization, you have to look at the outcomes from the trials that use those various food products that it contain each of those fat sources to be able to make claims then about what they affect. So they do operate differently. I think they also asked, is the public aware of it? That I would say we probably haven't talked as much about that as an organization, or I should say as a family, a soy family. And we could probably do a better job with that, but it hasn't been until the last 5 or 6 years where we've had a lot of commercially available high oleic soybean oil to actually be able to have the luxury of talking to consumers about that. Go ahead, Carson, if you have anything you want to add.
Well, I was going to
Oh,
jump in
go ahead.
actually,
Yes,
Julie, too.
yes,
Just with
please.
just to help you, Carson, you can jump in after this too. But as the United Soybean Board, we have been investing in the research for Julie and Carson to take back, right? That's what we really to say, hey, can a high oleic soybean variety take off and how would it be used and what would be the benefits? And so it's looking at the human food sector and also looking at the livestock feed side as well. So as a soybean farmer, we always want to create demand, right? We want to increase the price, and so high oleic has been on that forefront right now.
Carson, did you have something else to add?
I think those two addressed it perfectly.
I'd also just jump in that I talked about they're compatible, and they also are, they have different functionality. So that's a real strength. High oleic is more stable in frying operations, and then soybean oil has a different profile for that too. They really are complementary. I would hate to have anybody walk away and say they could be either or.
So there are several questions that came in, and thanks to all of you who are submitting questions, and even quite a few of you who are giving me your name. So that's always nice. But several are focused on countering the MAHA movement's messaging, which I would have to say there are some people in farm groups that have found compatibility with some of the MAHA's messaging. So it's not all perceived as negative. We certainly don't want to say it's all one-sided, but on this issue, when you've got people saying, we've got to move all French fries over to beef tallow, and you got people like Joe Rogan and TikTokers jumping into this fray. Any other additional thoughts from any of you about how you continue to clarify the science and bring up the information so people can make more informed decisions?
I'll say, as you know, we advocate for our growers. We start these conversations with, farmers want to be a part of making America healthy. At the end of the day, farmers work to feed, fuel the world, and also their own families. I don't believe a U.S. soybean grower is going to produce a product that they think is poisoning themselves or their families. And all the literature suggests that this product that they produce is sustainable and healthy. And that's not just us as the soybean industry, that is coming from folks like the American Heart Association, the qualified health claims that have been given to soybean oil that Julie mentioned earlier. And quite frankly, foreign governments also support the replacement of these oils with animal, or rather, replacing animal fats with oils like soybean oil. So it really is making sure that we are not combative towards the MAHA movement. We want to be a part of that, and just making sure that voices in that community understand that this is a product farmers stand behind, and there's a lot of evidence to prove its healthfulness.
Anyone else want to jump in, Carla?
Yeah, I can add something as well, right? I think we're trying to keep it positive, right? So farmers have to be positive because there's always hope for the next crop, hope for what we are investing in as a United Soybean board member as well. But I think there's some valuable, what I say, with challenges become opportunities, right? It's okay to ask questions. The great thing about this is we have the research to back it. So a lot of times when we're having conversations, even at a family function, as we all know they come up at times, it's it's to ask a question and then sometimes like, well, what's your solution to that? And a lot of times you can bring out the great points that Carson and Julie have made that we have. And for years we've had this research backing us. And now it's just time to highlight that. So I would say keep it positive, keep it personal on my side as a farmer and what we do and what we use in our own home because we personally are using, right, a soybean oil or a vegetable oil in everyday use. I use it in my detergent. I mean, I'm not afraid to use it in all sorts of ways because we know that it is safe for our families.
Yeah, and I'll just add, building on that. I think the what they're trying to accomplish, I think everybody in this organization agrees with. We want to make America healthy. It's the how, it's the tactics and the how they're going about it. And again, like I said earlier, there was a grain of confusion, 17, 18 years ago, but since then there's been hundreds of clinical studies on human subjects, not just mice, which is the premise of some of their arguments on the health perspective side. So I say this, which is it's trying to get the emotionalism out of it. As SNI Global, we work with clinical health professionals, whether it's dietitians or physicians or nurse practitioners, because they understand the complex nature of some of the science. It's easy to talk to them about it, and then they educate their own clients. So that's the way in which we're trying to combat this. We also work with influencers that are dietitians that understand the science, but then also have followings on social media. I tell you, 5 years ago, we didn't think it was important to be on social media because we're a science organization, but we're realizing that's where the game is being played now. And if you want to be relevant, you've got to be over there and you've got to be giving them information because I mean, I always go back to nature abhors a vacuum. It'll fill it if you don't step in there and try to dispel some of the myths. So that's how we're doing it. And like, again, I agree with everybody. It's about trying to stay positive, but it can get really discouraging sometimes.
No, I think most of American agriculture has been a little slower to the game of dealing with influencers than perhaps some of the other industries that have been involved in some of these things. But at the same time, thinking that, you're out there on the farm trying to do a good thing and raise your family, and those are your goals of being economically sustainable, first and foremost, so that you could keep the farming in the family. Carson, one other question came in, and I'm just going to try to put this towards the research that you did. Someone was asking about the impact of climate change and how that's going to influence productivity going forward. We know there's some terrific genetics coming forward that are changing the game for how we produce in the US, but were there any climate change impacts in the research that you shared with us? And if not, do you think that's something in the future that we should be looking at?
Yeah, this unfortunately, this analysis did not specifically take that into consideration. Again, I would say, as palm production increases, so do the negative environmental outcomes associated with that. One great thing about U.S. soy is that it truly is a sustainable product. And I'm sure Carla and USB could talk a lot more about the research that they're doing to help get some of those better genetics. If there's one thing that U.S. farmers are really great at is producing more with less. We have continued to reduce the amount of acreage that is used for agricultural production while simultaneously increasing our ultimate output. So I think that is certainly a concern. But if there's one thing that farmers can do very well in this country is adapt to challenges. And that is both the combination of the farmers themselves and also the research that we put behind these products.
And Carla, I don't know if you want to add anything to that because you've made production changes on your farm. And I think a lot of us know that soybeans have been growing more and more north of where they have traditionally been grown already. So adaptation going on in your farm, I'm sure, is already a big part of your game plan.
Yeah, 100%, Sarah. But Carson pretty much hit it on the head. I think, yeah, farmers are very adaptive to what is thrown in front of them. But on the USB front, we've definitely invested in research on varieties, right? Soybean varieties as we look forward to pest management, as we look forward to disease pressure, like you said, drought, environmental pressure. And all of that is, as farmers, we're looking to reduce the land use impact, the reduce soil erosion, reduce energy use. We have these goals that we're really trying to hit. And even on our own farms, it just comes back to that, right? We want it to be sustainable for the next generation. So I love that United Soybean Board is investing in the research to back the production on our own farms for our families for years to come.
Thank you. Julie, I'm going to save the last question for you here. One of our participants wants to know more about just kind of some of the intricacies behind how oils are used, i.e., should there be research on which oils are appropriate for specific uses, like for salad dressings versus cooking and things like that? Does your organization also look into specific uses of different oils?
We don't, but there are organizations who do, and I'd be glad to give those resources out. We look predominantly as how the oil affects the human body. We stay with human health and nutrition and the clinical trials associated with that and the results. There are other groups that we're affiliated with that look more at the processing and what makes it a unique attribute as far as food formulations or food frying or salad dressings. A lot of that goes back to that chemical structure I was talking about, whether the bonds, certain bonds are open, it makes it more susceptible to oxidation, and the frying expedites that type of thing. So yes, that information is all out there. I probably couldn't do it justice. It's really a little bit out. It's a little bit secondary to my area. So, but I would be glad if anybody wants to reach out to me, I can get you in touch with the right people.
Super. I think that would be helpful to elaborating on this discussion, which unfortunately we're about out of time here for our hour with all of you, but I really appreciate your insights and the opportunity to have you share a little bit more from the soy perspective. For those of you who are on this webinar and you want to continue to follow what's happening with the MAHA movement, what's happening overall with farm policy, and a lot of the different issues that we talked about today, please feel free to scan this QR code and you can get a free month of Agri-Pulse so you can see what we're up to without any obligation. Or if it comes down to it, you can always just send an email to pam@agri-pulse.com, and the old-fashioned email works too if you can't get this scan right away. Once again, I want to thank the Soy Checkoff and American Soybean Association for sponsoring this. And if you didn't have a chance to be part of the entire hour, we will be posting this and sending the link out for the recording as soon as we can get it up on agri-pulse.com, our website. And we encourage you to be on the lookout for that via email for anybody who signed up, or to share with your friends out on social media once it's available. We'll let you know. So with that, thanks everybody again. Great presentations, great discussion and questions from our audience. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.